Hi, I'm Sequoiah, and this is a new YouTube channel called Simply Sequoiah. And it's going to be about a variety of topics, but today's video is about something I used to do for a living for 20 plus years, and that was I was a landscaper. So the video is 10 things that I learned from being a landscaper. And my goal here is to help you guys not make mistakes that are really commonly made by other people. So if you're designing your own landscape or slowly gardening over time and creating a space that you want to look good and you have your certain goals. But these are just general overall principles from being having studied landscape design and construction, also been a landscaper for 20 years. So whether you're doing a vegetable garden or a food forest or just any type of garden really at all, this is going to pertain to you. So number one on the list is to always plant plants with different colored foliage so that there's something going on year round, regardless of whether the plants are blooming or not. So this can be purple colored foliage, silver colored foliage, variegated foliage, and just different shades of greens. If you don't know what variegation is, in short, it's a leaf that has different colors on it. Usually it's a darker green in the middle and a white or creamy or yellowy edge on the outside, but sometimes it can be like a dark green leaf with like yellow spots on it or other markings on the leaf that are interesting. Number two on the list is to not plant plants too close together. A lot of customers of mine wanted everything to look filled out in a year, and I would really try to discourage them from this because unless you have a compelling reason, like you're putting the house on the market soon and you really want it to look like a real garden, even though it's not a brand new garden, it's really not a good practice. I tend to encourage people to plant for 3 to 5 years out, looking filled in. And the reason for this is, let's say you're planting 3 lavenders in a row and they get 3 feet wide at maturity. If you plant them 2 feet apart, they're going to look really filled in a year or maybe 2 years. But if you plant them 3 feet apart, then they're going to look really beautiful in about 5 years, and it's going to be the correct spacing, and you're not going to have to prune these lavenders just because they're crowding each other out or crowding out other plants. So if you plant for that 1 to 2 year looking all filled out timeline, you're going to need to start cutting stuff back, and that's really, really high maintenance. So number three on the list is plant plants with different architecture. So if you're doing a garden and just everything is mounded and round, or everything is kind of all around knee height, for example, you don't have any interesting architecture, like using the example of Chicago on a boat ride on the river. You can see like there's tall, skinny, pointy buildings, and there's wider these, and there's shorter these, and they're very different from each other. So it becomes really, really interesting to look at as a city. And it's the same thing in the garden. Like if you have some really vertical plants that grow kind of straight up and make flowers at the top, like a flowering ornamental onion with a big bulb or globe at the top, or something like an edible would be Egyptian walking onions. They're a certain height, but they're very spiky. They're always upright. And then they have their crazy growth on the top, if you're familiar with that plant. Cacti with their big pads, and the way they grow on top of each other, kind of towering like a Jenga game. And then you could have some flowy ornamental grasses that are very wide and have, like, when they're flowering, they have really feathery texture, but they're very rounded and wide and move a lot in the wind. So these are ideas about bringing in variety. Number four on the list is try to have a garden theme. Like instead of just haphazardly going to the nursery and buying a couple plants here and there and just where am I going to put this, and it just kind of looks pieced together and with no particular theme. So examples of themes could be a more arid landscape, especially if you live in an arid place. That really makes ecological sense, like in a lot of California and Arizona and the Southwest and different areas, to have that theme. Then stick with that theme. Don't, it would look funny to just stick in like rose bushes and English cottage garden kind of plants like delphinium and larkspur. It just doesn't really have a cohesive feeling to it. But if everything in this arid garden is sort of like a cacti and a succulent, or just really a water conserving plant like a sage or something, then it really suits the theme. Another example of a theme would be a food forest, an edible garden, and just like all these really interesting plants here and there. And most people who come by don't even know what these things are, but it's edible and you can wander around, chew things and stick it in your mouth and take it into the kitchen and make something out of it. And it has this sort of wild herby theme, and everything looks really good, you know, all in that theme. So if you live in a foggy coastal area, like having an English cottage garden or a very flowery garden and plants that love water makes perfect sense. Or a woodland garden, you know, planting plants that love shade and love water is appropriate. And if you're in the desert, you know, stick with dry gardens, maybe that don't even need supplemental water, that once they're established, they can just survive off of the actual amount of precipitation that area gets, because that's what makes sense. Number 5 is piggybacking off the last one. Do a little research about the plants you're planning on using in your design. So maybe you're doing your garden slowly over time and you're thinking about planting certain things. It would be good to find out as much as you can about the plants in general, but also how they spread. Like, do they send out little roots underground and just make a bigger group over time? Or do they reseed everywhere? Or would they possibly, you know, be invasive? Don't plant things that you know are invasive and just think that you're going to stay on top of it. Do I want to really sign up for constant, you know, pulling of this nice plant, but that becomes a weed? A classic example would be bamboo. If you're going to plant a bamboo plant, you really need to know, is it a running bamboo where it's going to send out these invasive rhizomes, it's going to destroy fences, walkways, foundations of houses, etc., and be near impossible to get rid of? Or is it a clumping bamboo where you start off, your purchase plant is a small clump like this, and just slowly over time the clump gets bigger and bigger until, you know, it's a certain amount of feet and it's well contained, and that's how it spreads. So do your research on the plants before you purchase them. And please subscribe to the channel. It's new and I really appreciate it. Love your comments and suggestions for future content. Number 6 is bigger isn't better. People waste money buying bigger plants, and I always tried to encourage my clients to actually spend less money and get plants that were in 4-inch containers, so little square containers about that big. And the plants are smaller, but the reason I encourage this is because the plants have an easier time getting planted and adjusting to the new soil. They've been growing in beautiful potting soil in the nursery and been catered to their whole short lives. And then they're being planted into this other soil somewhere else that's totally different than what it grew up in. And so if you have a smaller root system, it actually can really take off much quicker. If someone wants to plant a shrub as screening, let's say from a neighbor or a bathroom window or something like that, it feels funny to just get the 1-gallon plant where the bush is only 12 inches tall. But if you did a side-by-side test, which I have done, between the 1-gallon and the 5-gallon, where the 5-gallon plant, the plant is already 3 feet high, that in about a year and a half, the 1 gallon has completely caught up to the 5 and you can't tell which is which. And in fact, the 1 gallon may pass up the 5 gallon depending on how the 5 gallon was treated in its nursery life before you. Plants are expensive, and it's nice to save the money for the soil. And number 7 is try to plant the smaller plants closer to the paths. So that's from ground hugging to like a foot or a foot and a half or something like that. Then behind that, you can have the plants that at maturity are going to be over 2 feet tall, maybe 2 to 4 feet. And then behind that, if you have more layers in this garden, then you can have the larger plants. And the reason for this is, I don't know if you've ever walked down a garden path where there's like this giant shrub. No matter how beautiful those flowers are or how wonderful it smells, it feels kind of claustrophobic because you're walking along this path and there's this huge plant like way above you, kind of in your face, and you can't really see the garden. And it feels kind of claustrophobic and it cuts you off from it. And it just doesn't feel right. It feels kind of strange. Like, how did this plant get here? Why is this here? Even if you don't have that conscious thought, it just doesn't quite feel right. So if you have the lower plants closer to the path and you can see them and see their texture of their leaves, see their little flowers, or harvest them, that's an important one. Like, you can have your herbs closer to the path, like parsley or cilantro, thyme, oregano. Then behind those, you can have the other things that you don't need to access quite so much. They're more to look at or to access for eating less often, like an artichoke plant, for example. Consider garden maintenance when you're choosing your plant spacing and the types of plants that you have, because we want our gardens to last a long time unless we're planning on moving or something soon. We don't want to sign up for just constantly having to cut everything back and do all this stuff. We want it to be as low maintenance as possible so that the pruning is more of a once a year kind of thing, like prune the apple tree for health and better productivity, and keeping, good airflow and having bigger, larger apples, for example. You want your work to be like that, or getting the weeds before they set seed and cause a problem for the next year because you were behind on your weeding and they all made seeds and they went everywhere. So you want to save your garden maintenance for things like that. So just make those choices that hopefully don't require you to just be constantly tending to the garden, because we do need to tend gardens anyway. There are things that need to be done. Well, don't buy something because it has a beautiful flower. Like, know what the pros and cons of that plant are and what it's going to do. So there are some plants, for example, that bloom for 2 weeks of the year, and it might be a vine, and you might have to cut it back once a year, and you might have to prune it after it blooms, and it might be really rambunctious and tend to grow over the fence and over the trellis or whatever and onto your house, and you might have suckers on it that will ruin the paint, or acid that will eat away the finish on your house. So, like, yes, it has a beautiful flower, but maybe that's not the best choice necessarily. Or just to see something in the nursery that has this beautiful flower, be like, I have no idea how big this gets. I've never seen one. I don't know anything about it. Is it deciduous in the winter, or is it evergreen? Does it even do well in my area? Because unfortunately, nurseries will sell plants that aren't appropriate for your area. So understand whether this is a bulb and it just comes up and blooms just like a week, or, is this a plant that's going to show that beautiful flower for longer. So better to just know about it a little bit first, research it a little bit, and then say, oh yeah, I definitely want that. I have a great spot on the fence for that, and it can be as rambunctious as it wants to be, and I don't mind that it only blooms two weeks of the year, because it's worth it to me. My heart goes pitter-patter when I see those flowers. So that's great. Just consider everything and don't fall for just only the pretty flower. And number 10, I alluded to earlier, is consider choosing plants and materials for your garden that are appropriate for your climate. So if you live in southern, southwest, or southern California, or like somewhere arid, consider planting the types of plants that don't require supplemental water, that are acclimated to the desert. And consider using materials that are available locally, like if you live in a woodland sort of area with a lot of forestry, then a certain type of mulch is going to make more sense than another. Try to consider local as well in that equation. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this helps you when you're planning out your garden and your landscape, and helps give you some ideas. And I want to add that if you're revamping your garden and you're not starting from scratch and you're just like, it's a little boring, or I need a little more drama or something. So I hope I give you some ideas of like, yeah, I need some more upright plants, or I need some more spiky plants, or some more ornamental grasses that will move in the wind and provide a different texture. And please hit subscribe and join me for the next video on Simply Sequoia. And number 8? I forgot what I was gonna say.